Before we dive in, please subscribe to the channel and make sure to watch this video until the very end for some incredible insights. You won't want to miss this.
They seated me beside the kitchen. Not near my family. Not near the bride. Not even close enough to hear the speeches without the sound of dishes crashing in the background. That's where this story begins. 5 minutes later, the most respected man at the wedding would walk past every beautifully decorated table, ignore every important guest in the room, and ask a question nobody expected. "Sir, may I sit here?" But before I tell you why he asked that question, you need to understand how I ended up at that table in the first place. My name is Steele. I'm 65 years old. And for almost 20 years, my children believed I had become the kind of man people slowly stopped talking about. Not because I had done something terrible. Because they thought I had become ordinary. Funny thing is, people rarely notice when someone disappears. It almost never happens all at once. It happens one missed phone call. One cancelled visit. One uncomfortable family dinner. Until one day everyone simply accepts that you're no longer part of the picture. That's exactly what happened to me. 20 years earlier I had lost my management job at a logistics company. Corporate restructuring. That's the phrase they used. It's amazing how polite words can hide painful truths. I carried my belongings home inside a cardboard box. My wife Diane looked at that box for a long time. She didn't yell. She didn't blame me. Looking back, that almost hurt more. 2 weeks later she sat across from me at our kitchen table. "I don't think I can do this anymore." 4 simple words. Then another sentence I'll probably remember for the rest of my life. "I need someone who's still moving forward." I wanted to tell her I wasn't finished. That losing a job isn't the same as losing a future. But sometimes people make their decision long before they tell you. Emily was 12. Mark had just turned 15. They packed their things. Moved 2 states away. And suddenly my house became painfully quiet. Most fathers fight. They hire lawyers. They demand weekends. Shared custody. Arguments. I didn't. Not because I loved my children less. Because I couldn't bear the thought of making them choose between parents. So I became easy. Too easy. Birthday phone calls. Christmas cards. Monthly checks. School graduations from the back row. Always present. Never really included. Looking back, that might have been my biggest mistake. Not losing my job. Not losing my marriage. Teaching everyone, including myself, that I could always be moved to the side without complaining. Life has a strange sense of humor. The same month I lost everything, I quietly started building something. For years I'd invested my savings. Nothing exciting. Warehouses. Regional manufacturers. Small commercial properties. Businesses nobody wanted. While everyone chased exciting opportunities, I chased predictable ones. It wasn't glamorous. It was patient. 1 investment became 2. 2 became 6. 6 became 20. Eventually I opened a tiny office inside an old garage. There wasn't even enough room for 2 desks. The filing cabinet leaned slightly to the left because one wall had broken years earlier. My coffee machine worked only if you hit the side twice. That little office became Steepwood Capital. I didn't name it after myself. I named it after the street where I learned to ride my first bicycle. Not because I was sentimental. Because I wanted complete privacy. The less people knew, the easier it was to work. Over the next 18 years, the business quietly grew. Every success bought another opportunity. Every opportunity created another relationship. Until one day, without realizing exactly when it happened, I wasn't trying to survive anymore. I was helping other companies survive. Funny enough, nobody in my family ever asked what I actually did. Not once. People assume curiosity comes naturally. It doesn't. Curiosity disappears the moment people believe they've already figured you out. Whenever Diane asked, she never really waited for an answer. Whenever Mark called, work wasn't part of the conversation. Emily always seemed rushed. Life moved on. So did I. Eventually they settled on a version of me that required the least amount of thought. Retired. Quiet. Probably living off savings. Maybe selling insurance somewhere. I never corrected them. At first. Because I thought the truth would sound like bragging. Later. Because silence became easier. Then Emily called. Dad. Her voice sounded unusually cheerful. The kind of cheerful people use when they're nervous. I'm getting married. For a moment. Everything else disappeared. I didn't hear the television. Didn't hear the rain against my living room window. I only heard my little girl's voice. Even though she wasn't little anymore. She talked about the venue. The flowers. Connor. His family. Then came the sentence she'd obviously rehearsed. So. Mom thinks it'd be easier if you sat a little farther back. Farther back. Interesting phrase. Not away. Not behind. Just. Farther back. So the important guests can stay together. She corrected herself immediately. I mean. The business guests. I smiled. Even though she couldn't see it. Whatever makes your day easier, sweetheart. She thanked me. Hung up. And I sat there staring at my reflection in the dark television screen for almost an hour. Not because of the seating. Because she genuinely believed I'd understand. Which meant I'd spent 20 years teaching my own daughter that I would always accept less. The morning of the wedding. I drove 4 hours. The countryside was beautiful. Rolling green hills. Old oak trees. A sky so blue it almost looked painted. The venue looked like something from a magazine. Stone walls. White flowers. Golden lights hanging between ancient trees. People smiled as they walked around carrying champagne glasses. Luxury has a particular sound. Soft laughter. Expensive shoes on gravel. Conversations about vacations and investments. Everyone seemed perfectly comfortable. Except me. Not because I couldn't afford to belong there. Because somewhere along the way, I'd forgotten what belonging felt like. The ceremony itself was beautiful. Emily looked exactly like her mother had looked on our wedding day. For one impossible second. I remembered carrying her on my shoulders through the backyard when she was 5 years old. She used to grab my ears and pretend she was steering a horse. Funny. The people who once couldn't fall asleep without you eventually become adults who forget where they seated you. I didn't cry during the ceremony. I came close. But I didn't. The reception was different. A young wedding planner smiled politely. Mr. Steele. Yes. This way, please. She walked past the family tables. Past Connor's relatives. Past Diane. Past the beautifully decorated center of the reception. Then farther. And farther. Until we reached a long table beside the kitchen entrance. She stopped. Looked at her clipboard. Then looked at me. There was something in her eyes. Not guilt. Recognition. She knew. People who work weddings notice everything. I'm sorry, she whispered almost silently. I looked down. The place card read. Harold Steele. Exactly where someone intended it to be. I smiled at her. It's all right. She nodded. Walked away. I sat down. Behind me. Kitchen doors opened every few seconds. Plates clattered. Waiters hurried past. Someone laughed inside the catering tent. The closest person to greet me wasn't family. It was a 19-year-old waitress filling my water glass. She hesitated. "I'm sorry, sir." I looked up. "For what?" "I think they accidentally seated you back here." I smiled. "No. They knew exactly what they were doing." She looked like she wanted to say something else. Instead, she quietly placed fresh bread on my table. The kind gesture of a stranger. Sometimes strangers see us more clearly than family does. The reception slowly filled with conversation. Crystal glasses clinked. Someone laughed a little too loudly at a joke that wasn't funny. A jazz trio played softly near the dance floor. Every table looked complete. Except mine. The kitchen doors behind me never stopped swinging open. Every few seconds came another burst of steam. Another stack of dishes. Another waiter rushing past carrying trays that probably weighed more than they did. Funny thing about sitting near a kitchen. People stop lowering their voices. They assume nobody important is listening. I heard cooks arguing over salmon. Servers comparing tips. One young dishwasher talking excitedly about buying his first car. They all worked harder than anyone in the ballroom. And somehow, their table still felt warmer than the one my family had chosen for me. I poured myself another glass of water. Across the room, Emily was laughing. She looked beautiful. Not because of the dress. Because she looked happy. That mattered more than anything. I reminded myself of that every few minutes. This wasn't my day. It was hers. Even if I'd become little more than a guest in the background. About 20 minutes later, Mark wandered over. His tie was already loose. Champagne glass in one hand. Phone in the other. He smiled when he saw me. Then looked around. "Dad." "What? You're really sitting back here?" "I am." He looked toward the front of the room. Then back at me. "I'll see if someone can move you." I appreciated that. I really did. But I also knew he wasn't going to. Because before taking a single step, he glanced toward his mother. That one glance told me everything. Some people ask permission with words. Others ask with their eyes. Mark had learned long ago which mattered more. A minute later he sighed. "It's probably too late to change now." I nodded. "It usually is." He smiled awkwardly. Patted my shoulder. Then walked away. Not because he was cruel. Because discomfort is contagious. Most people don't know how to stand beside someone who's being quietly humiliated. So they leave. Dinner was served. The waiter placed a steak in front of me exactly the same way he served everyone else. No difference. Food has a funny way of ignoring social status. Then something happened that nobody else remembered. But I'll never forget. A heavy-set man at the next table held up his empty wine glass without even turning around. More Cabernet. He assumed I worked there. For a second, I looked at him. He never looked back. He just kept talking about golf memberships and investment portfolios. I could have corrected him. Instead, I picked up the bottle sitting on my own table. Walked over. Filled his glass. Not a drop spilled. He nodded. Appreciate it. Still never looked at my face. Then continued talking. I returned to my chair. Sat down. And something inside me quietly settled. Not anger. Not sadness. Acceptance. People don't always treat you according to who you are. They treat you according to the story they've already written about you. Tonight. Everyone had decided I belonged in an apron. Not a suit. The young waitress who'd apologized earlier watched the whole thing. When she passed again, she leaned closer. I'm really sorry. You don't have to apologize. I know. She hesitated. But somebody should. That sentence stayed with me. Because she was right. Somebody should. The speeches began. Connor's best man was first. He was funny. Confident. The room laughed exactly where he expected them to. Halfway through, he raised his champagne glass toward Richard Whitfield. I guess smart money runs in the family. Everyone laughed. Then he smiled. And probably somewhere else in this room too. He looked briefly toward the back of the reception. Toward my side of the tent. It was strange. Almost deliberate. I frowned. I didn't understand what he meant. Not yet. The music started again. Emily and Connor stepped onto the dance floor. Everyone stood. Phones came out. The lights dimmed. They danced slowly beneath hundreds of tiny golden lights hanging above the lawn. I clapped harder than anyone. Not because people were watching. Because nobody was. That's the strange thing about unconditional love. It still applauds. Even when nobody notices. Halfway through the dance, I caught Diane looking toward me. Just for a second. Our eyes met. She looked away first. Maybe she felt guilty. Maybe she didn't. After 20 years, I'd stopped trying to guess what was happening inside someone else's heart. Outside, the sun disappeared behind the trees. The evening became cooler. Guests drifted between the ballroom and the gardens. Laughter floated through the air. Then, a black sedan rolled quietly onto the gravel driveway. Nobody paid much attention. Luxury weddings attract important people all evening. Another guest. Another expensive suit. Nothing unusual. Until he stepped out. Tall. Silver hair. Perfect charcoal suit. No security. No dramatic entrance. Just quiet confidence. The kind real influence usually carries. His name was Preston Vale. Most people there knew who he was. Some pretended not to stare. Others suddenly stood a little straighter. Richard Whitfield noticed him almost immediately. I watched Richard begin walking toward the entrance. Then someone stopped him for a conversation. Those 30 seconds changed everything. Because Preston entered the ballroom alone. No escort. No introduction. He slowly looked around the room. Smiling politely. Shaking hands with people he recognized. Then his eyes moved farther back. Toward my table. Toward the kitchen. He looked directly at me. Nothing happened. He kept walking. I smiled to myself. Of course. It had been nearly 8 months since our last board meeting. I'd shaved my beard. Lost some weight. I was wearing my oldest jacket. People don't recognize you outside the places they're used to seeing you. He stopped beside my chair. Good evening, sir. His voice was warm. Respectful. Do you need another bottle of water? For 1 second. I almost laughed. Even Preston had mistaken me for part of the staff. No thank you. I'm all right. He smiled politely. Turned to leave. Then froze. Not dramatically. Almost imperceptibly. His head tilted slightly. His eyes narrowed. He looked back. Really looked. Recognition doesn't arrive all at once. It arrives in pieces. The voice. The smile. The posture. The eyes. Suddenly, his entire expression changed. "Harold?" I stood. "Good evening, Preston." For several seconds, neither of us spoke. He looked around the room. Looked back at me. Then quietly asked, "What are you doing back here?" I smiled. "It's my daughter's wedding." He looked toward Emily. Back toward me. Then toward the tiny table beside the kitchen. His face became strangely serious. "I see." That was all he said. Just, "I see." He didn't ask another question. He didn't call attention to himself. Instead, he slowly reached for the empty chair beside mine. Pulled it back. Looked at me. "Sir. May I sit with you?" The ballroom seemed to stop breathing. Not because anyone had heard the words. Because everyone had seen the movement. One of the most respected men in the room. Walking past every reserved table. Ignoring every VIP. Choosing the smallest table in the reception. The chair squeaked softly as he sat down. Neither of us spoke. 5 seconds. 10 seconds. 15. The silence became louder than the music. Guests started whispering. Servers slowed down. Richard Whitfield finally noticed. He frowned. Why? Why was Preston Vale sitting beside Harold Steele? Nobody understood. Not yet. For a few long seconds. Nobody moved. Not the servers. Not the guests. Not even the band. Preston simply sat beside me, folded his hands on the table, and looked around the reception with quiet disappointment. Then he smiled at me. "I was hoping," he said softly, "to meet you under better circumstances than this." His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The silence around us carried every word farther than shouting ever could. I smiled. "I've had worse dinners." He laughed. The tension broke between us. Not in the room. Only between two old friends. A waiter hurried over. "Mr. Vale, would you prefer another table?" Preston looked at him kindly. "No. I'm exactly where I want to be." The waiter nodded. Walked away. That single sentence traveled across the ballroom faster than any announcement could. People weren't hearing it. They were reading it. The most important guest had chosen the smallest table. Which meant, either he was incredibly strange, or everyone else had misunderstood something important. Richard Whitfield reached us first. He wore the practiced smile of a banker who had spent 40 years making strangers feel welcome. "Preston. I'm so glad you could make it." Preston stood. They shook hands. Then Richard looked at me. Only briefly. The same way he'd looked at me every time we'd met before. Like background furniture. Preston noticed. "I don't believe you've had a proper conversation with Harold." Richard smiled politely. "We've met." "No." Preston said calmly. "You've been introduced. Those aren't always the same thing." Richard blinked. For the first time all evening. He seemed unsure of himself. "I suppose you're right." Preston turned toward me. "Harold and I have worked together for years." Richard looked surprised. "I didn't realize." "I'm not surprised." Preston answered. "Harold doesn't usually tell people who he is." Richard looked back at me. "You're in finance." I smiled. "A little." Preston chuckled. "That's like calling the Pacific Ocean a puddle." Richard laughed politely. He still didn't understand. Preston wasn't finished. "I've spent most of my career meeting people who wanted recognition." He paused. "Harold is one of the very few who spent his life avoiding it." Vivian Whitfield arrived next. She immediately sensed something unusual. Is everything all right? Preston smiled. Everything's fine. I was simply thanking someone who changed thousands of lives. She looked confused. I don't understand. You weren't supposed to. He answered gently. Then he looked at me. As long as I've known Harold, I've never once heard him introduce himself by his achievements. He introduces himself by his name. I've always admired that. Nobody spoke. Not because they finally knew how much money I had. Because they suddenly realized respect like this couldn't be purchased. It had to be earned. Across the room, Emily noticed the crowd gathering. She excused herself from a conversation and hurried over. Dad. She looked between Preston and me. Everything okay? Preston smiled warmly. You must be Emily. She nodded. I'm Preston. I know who you are. He smiled again. I've heard about you for years. Emily looked surprised. You have? He nodded. Your father talks about you at almost every board meeting. She looked at me. You do? I shrugged. A father has to talk about something. She smiled. Then her eyes filled with tears. Not because of Preston. Because she just realized something. She knew almost nothing about the last 20 years of my life. Yet somehow, the people in that world knew everything about her. She whispered. I didn't even know where you worked. I looked at her quietly. I know. She covered her mouth. I checked the seating chart. I saw your name. I saw where you'd be sitting. I remember thinking. She stopped. Closed her eyes. I remember thinking it would only be for dinner. I told myself it wasn't a big deal. My own father. And I signed it anyway. Nobody interrupted her. Some confessions deserve silence. She looked at me again. I'm so sorry. I stood. Walked toward her. And hugged her. Not because she deserved immediate forgiveness. Because she'd finally chosen honesty over pride. Sometimes that's where healing begins. The reception quietly continued around us. Music returned. People resumed talking. But something had changed. Not in the room. Inside the people who mattered. Later that evening, Diane found me standing alone outside beneath the old oak trees. The reception lights glowed behind us. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, she sighed. I owe you an apology. I nodded once. She looked toward the ballroom. I convinced myself you had given up. It made leaving easier. I told that story so many times. I eventually believed it. I listened. Didn't interrupt. She looked at me. You didn't become small. I just stopped looking. That sentence surprised me. Because it was true. For both of us. I wasn't completely innocent either. I admitted. I hid behind silence. I thought protecting my privacy was strength. Sometimes. It was just fear. She smiled sadly. I wish we'd figured that out 20 years ago. So do I. Then we both laughed softly. Not because anything was funny. Because grief sometimes sounds exactly like laughter when it finally becomes light enough to carry. A month after the wedding, Emily called. Dad. Would you come visit? I did. She and Connor lived in a modest house outside Boston. Nothing extravagant. Just comfortable. The first thing she showed me wasn't the nursery she was planning. Or the kitchen she'd renovated. She walked me into the garage. There sat an old wooden desk. My first office desk. The one I'd sold years earlier. You found it? I asked. She smiled. I called your old landlord. He kept it. I bought it. I ran my hand across the scratched wood. Every mark carried a memory. Every stain reminded me of nights I'd worked until sunrise. Emily looked at me. I wanted one piece of the life I missed. Neither of us spoke after that. We didn't need to. Sometimes understanding arrives quietly. Months later. Mark called. Dad. I've been thinking. I learned something that night. What? I spent years trying to impress people. He laughed. The only person whose respect actually mattered. I never bothered getting. I smiled. You've got plenty of time. I hope so. So do I. Life slowly became ordinary again. The best kind of ordinary. Sunday dinners. Phone calls without birthdays as an excuse. Family photographs where nobody wondered where I should stand. A year later. Emily gave birth to a little boy. When the nurse placed him in my arms. He wrapped his tiny fingers around one of mine. Amazing. How someone so small can make old wounds feel lighter. Emily smiled from the hospital bed. He's going to know all of you. Not just the version we imagined. 3 years have passed since that wedding. Every Sunday. He climbs into my lap wearing superhero pajamas. He likes asking questions. Endless questions. Last week. He tugged on the sleeve of my old gray cardigan. Grandpa. Why do you still wear this old sweater? I looked down at the frayed cuff. The same one Diane used to tease me about. The same cardigan I'd worn to the wedding. The same cardigan Preston recognized before anyone else recognized me. I smiled. Because every time I wear it, it reminds me that clothes tell stories. But never the whole story. He thought about that very seriously. Then nodded. Children have a beautiful habit. They accept wisdom. Long before they fully understand it. He climbed off my lap. Ran into the backyard. And started laughing. I watched him through the kitchen window. Then looked at my reflection. Older now. A few more gray hairs. A few more lines around my eyes. Still the same man. The wedding didn't make me successful. The company didn't make me valuable. Even Preston's respect didn't change who I was. The only thing that truly changed was that my family finally stopped looking at the seat I'd been given. And started looking at the man sitting in it. Funny. People still ask me about that wedding sometimes. They usually ask the same question. What did it feel like when everyone finally realized who you were? I always tell them the truth. That wasn't the moment that mattered. The moment that mattered was when my daughter finally asked, Dad, who are you? Not because she wanted to know what I owned. Because she finally wanted to know me. And after 20 years. That was worth more than every building. Every investment. And every boardroom I'd ever walked into. Sometimes. The smallest table in the room. Becomes the place where a family finally finds its way back home.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, please like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments how it made you feel. I'll see you in the next one.